How can we know if someone truly loves us? And more importantly, how do we interpret their actions when they seem contradictory, especially when someone we love ignores us? One of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century left us with profound teachings about the human psyche and the dynamics of love. From his perspective, love is not just a feeling, but an interaction between the conscious and the unconscious, between what we know about ourselves and what remains hidden in our shadows. If you have ever asked yourself why someone who says they love you sometimes seems to ignore you, you must understand that the answer does not lie in the surface of their actions, but in what hides behind them. Not everything that looks like rejection is truly disinterest. In many cases, what is at play is a deep psychological process that even the person themselves does not fully understand. For Jung, the unconscious guides many of our actions without us being aware of it. When someone ignores you or pulls away, it is not always because they do not care, but because they are struggling with something within themselves. Love confronts us with our own vulnerability. Jung explained that when a person is faced with such a deep feeling, their psyche may react in unexpected ways. There may be an unconscious desire to come closer, but at the same time a rooted fear that pushes them away. This fear can come from wounds of the past, from a childhood where affection was conditional, or from experiences that left scars on the soul. That is why some people, when they feel they are developing genuine feelings, react by distancing themselves as a defense mechanism to avoid the pain their unconscious associates with attachment. If you have ever felt that someone with whom you had a special connection suddenly started to ignore you, do not automatically assume that love has faded. Sometimes love is so strong that it awakens shadows within the psyche that the person does not know how to handle. Jung said that what we deny in ourselves does not disappear. It manifests in our relationships. And when someone struggles with their own shadow, they may project that struggle onto the person who matters most to them. In other words, the act of ignoring is not always a declaration of disinterest, but a reflection of an internal conflict the person does not know how to resolve. It is difficult to accept, but often the one who ignores us is not running from us, but from themselves. Love, when it is true, acts as a mirror that shows us who we really are, with all our light and all our shadows. Some people are not ready to face themselves in that reflection, and instead of looking within and dealing with what love is revealing to them, they choose to step back. It is not something they do consciously, but an impulse born from the deepest part of their unconscious. Jung taught us that love can be the catalyst for a process of inner transformation, but that transformation does not always happen without resistance. The ego, that part of us that seeks to protect us from any kind of pain, can sabotage the deepest connections out of fear of the unknown. When someone ignores us after having shown interest, it is possible that their ego is reacting with fear to the total surrender that love implies. The mind seeks to maintain control, but love, by its very nature, is an act of surrender. It is important to understand that each person has their own internal process, and that not everyone is at the same level of emotional awareness. Some people feel comfortable surrendering to love without reservation, while others struggle with the idea of letting go completely. Genuine love requires vulnerability, and not everyone is willing to show themselves completely bare in front of another person, not physically, but emotionally. If you have ever asked yourself why someone who seemed so connected to you suddenly started acting with indifference, remember that love is not just a feeling, but a deep, psychological process that awakens aspects of our psyche that may be dormant or repressed. Some people need time to process what they feel, to understand what love is awakening within them. It is not always about rejection, but about a moment of introspection in which the person needs to make peace with their own fears and shadows before being able to fully surrender. The unconscious has mysterious ways of manifesting in our relationships. Sometimes the distance a person takes is an unconscious test to see if love is real. Jung spoke of how the human soul constantly seeks certainty in an uncertain world. And some people need to verify that love is not fleeting, that the connection is strong enough to withstand even distance. Although this does not justify harmful behavior, it helps us understand that love is a play of internal forces that go far beyond what we can see on the surface. If you are going through a situation where someone special seems to be pulling away or ignoring you, instead of reacting with pain or frustration, try to observe the situation from a deeper perspective. Ask yourself what might be happening inside that person's psyche, not as an excuse, but as a way of understanding that love is not always linear, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is giving space for the other person to work through their own inner process. True love is not possession, not control, not an unchanging guarantee. Jung taught us that love is a journey of self-knowledge and growth, and sometimes that journey involves moments of silence, distance, and introspection. But if the love is real, if the connection is genuine, then even in the absence there is a presence, and what is true will always find its way back. When someone who says they love you pulls away without any apparent explanation, the first reaction is usually to look for answers on the surface. We wonder what we did wrong, what we might have said, whether there was a mistake that caused them to distance themselves. But we rarely stop to consider that the real answer is not in the external, but in that person's inner world. Jung taught us that our actions and decisions are often driven by forces we do not fully understand. What appears to be a conscious decision is often just the manifestation of something much deeper moving in the shadows. If he loves you and ignores you, instead of seeing this as a sign of disinterest, observe what might be happening inside him. Love awakens something within us that we are not always ready to face. Wounds from childhood, insecurities we thought we had overcome, even the fear of losing control. To love means to expose oneself, and to expose oneself means to risk being hurt. Not everyone is ready to take that risk, even when the feeling is genuine. Many times, indifference is not rejection, but an unconscious attempt to regain control. Jung explained that the ego fears what it cannot manage, and authentic love is one of the most uncontrollable forces that exist. For some people, falling in love means losing their independence, ceasing to be who they are, and the ego reacts with defense mechanisms. One of the most common is distance. Pulling away becomes a way to avoid feeling something too deep, too powerful, something that could change how they perceive their own identity. Love brings out both the best and the worst in each of us. Jung said that what bothers us most in others is nothing more than a reflection of what we deny in ourselves. When someone distances themselves from you, it is often because something in you is reflecting a part of them they are not ready to accept. If he feels that with you he is becoming too vulnerable, too open, his unconscious may push him to retreat, not because he does not care about you, but because the relationship is confronting him with aspects of himself that he prefers to avoid. This explains why sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who hurt us the most with their indifference. It is not that they want to hurt us, but love puts them in a state of internal conflict, where their emotions and fears clash in an invisible battlefield. They are not always aware of what is happening. They simply feel an internal pressure that leads them to pull away. Sometimes they even look for logical excuses to justify their behavior. But the truth is that the root of their withdrawal lies on a much deeper level. When someone who loves you starts to ignore you, it is natural to want answers. We look for signs, we try to analyze their words, their behavior. We even resort to strategies to get their attention. But the reality is that there is nothing external you can do to change another person's internal process. Jung taught us that each person is on their own psychological journey, and that you cannot force someone to face their shadow if they are not ready. Love cannot be forced. Awareness cannot be imposed. We can only allow each person to follow their process at their own pace. The hardest thing to accept is that in some cases, love is not enough to keep someone close, not because the feeling isn't real, but because love involves growth and transformation, and not everyone is ready to go through that process. For Jung, the purpose of love is not possession nor absolute security, but the evolution of the self. A relationship can be the catalyst for an awakening, but each person must decide whether they are willing to go through it or not. If he loves you but pulls away, ask yourself what that distance represents in his inner world. It may be that you're touching a part of him that hasn't yet healed, an aspect of his psyche he's afraid to face. Maybe he realized that being with you requires a level of emotional honesty he's not prepared for. Jung said the unconscious is never wrong. It always places us in situations that show us what we need to learn. Perhaps this situation isn't only about him, but also about you. Maybe the real message of this distance isn't in what he's feeling, but in what you need to discover about yourself. Love is a mirror. It shows us what we are, what we fear, and what we need to heal. If someone ignores you, don't just see the act itself. Look at what that act is reflecting in you. Ask yourself why their absence hurts so much, why you need their validation to feel whole. Jung believed that the greatest trap in love is seeking in the other what we can only find within ourselves. When we depend on someone else to feel loved, we are handing over our power, letting our happiness depend on something we can't control. Authentic love is not a game of strategies or emotional manipulation. It's not about who ignores more or who shows less interest. It is a process of self-discovery, of evolution, and of integrating our shadow. Sometimes the best response to someone's indifference is not to beg or try to prove your worth, but simply to observe without judgment, without expectations, without needing immediate answers. Because often distance is not the end, but just a pause on the path. If he truly loves you, sooner or later his own fears will settle, and he will find a way back to you. But if he doesn't, then the lesson his absence taught you will be more valuable than any relationship you might have had. Because in the end, true love is not the one that holds you back out of fear, but the one that sets you free with trust. Love confronts us with our very essence in a way that few experiences can. It is not a fleeting emotion. It is a force that exposes what we hide from ourselves, that shines a light on the darkest corners of our psyche, and forces us to face what we don't want to see. That is why when someone who loves you pulls away, it is not always a conscious act of disinterest, but a response to a deep fear that had been dormant and that love has awakened. Jung explained that the unconscious governs much of our behavior, and that many of the things we do are not truly decided by us, but are manifestations of impulses, wounds, and inner conflicts we don't even fully understand. Love is a territory where the unconscious becomes more visible than ever. It is in relationship with another that projections emerge, traumas, buried memories, everything we try to avoid. When someone falls in love, they're not just facing the present, but also everything from the past, their fears, their losses, their wounds. Everything resurfaces in a way that doesn't happen in any other area of life. And when the mind feels overwhelmed by emotions it doesn't know how to handle, the most natural reaction is to run. That's why many people, when they begin to feel something real, don't draw closer, they take distance. It's not that love doesn't exist, but that it's too intense to handle. In that moment, there are those who have spent their whole lives repressing their emotions, building an armor to protect themselves from pain. They've learned not to depend on anyone, to control their surroundings, to remain strong and closed off to avoid being hurt. But love breaks all those barriers. When someone enters our life and touches us at the deepest level, we find ourselves in a place where the ego's strategies no longer work, where there's no plan that guarantees we won't get hurt. Real love makes us vulnerable, and not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone is willing to let the mask fall and face the possibility of being wounded. They prefer to ignore, to distance themselves, to disappear, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. Jung explained that what we avoid does not disappear, but hides in our shadow and eventually takes control from there. When someone ignores their own feelings, when they try to convince themselves they can move on without facing what they feel, They are, in fact, only feeding an inner conflict that, sooner or later, will manifest in another form. It may show up as anxiety, dissatisfaction, or a feeling of emptiness. They don't understand, because what we repress does not die. It simply changes form and chases us in ways we cannot predict. If he distances himself, but you still feel the love is there, don't try to force him to stay, because no one can be forced to face their own fears before they're ready. The only thing you can do is understand that his distance is not necessarily a reflection of you, but of his own inner process. It is not your responsibility to fix what is not ready to be healed, nor to wait endlessly for someone to resolve their conflicts. What you can do is observe what this situation is teaching you. Because relationships don't just reveal the other's inner world, they also show us our own shadows, our own wounds, our own attachments. When someone you love ignores you, the question shouldn't be how to make them come back, but what this experience is teaching you about yourself. Maybe you're discovering that you base your worth on external validation, that you feel you only deserve love if the other person shows it in a specific way. Maybe you're realizing that the fear of abandonment has been driving your relationships, making you hold on to people who are not ready to offer what you need. Jung said that self-knowledge is the only path to true freedom, because when you understand why you react the way you do, when you stop acting out of lack and begin to act from awareness, you're no longer a prisoner of past patterns. You no longer need to beg for love or fear absence, because you realize that true love is never found outside of you, but in the relationship you have with yourself. Love that isn't based on awareness becomes a battlefield where fear and insecurity take over. The person who pulls away is often not running from you, but from the image of themselves they see reflected in the relationship. And if instead of seeing that as personal rejection, you can understand that each person is on their own path of evolution, then you free yourself from the burden of trying to control what you cannot control. You realize it is not your task to make someone stay, nor to convince anyone to love you. True love is not a power game, not a negotiation, not a constant struggle to gain the other's attention. It is a meeting of two souls who are ready to truly see each other, without masks, without fear, without barriers. Jung spoke of synchronicity, of how people come into our lives for a reason, of how every experience is an opportunity to learn something our soul needs. If someone came into your life and then pulled away, ask yourself what teaching this passing presence left behind. Not all loves are meant to stay, but all have a role in our growth. And if right now you're feeling the emptiness of their absence, maybe it's time to fill that space with something greater than waiting for them to return. Maybe it's time to reconnect with yourself, to look inward and discover which part of you still needs healing before you can live a love not marked by fear and uncertainty. The answer is never out there. It's not in what the other person does or doesn't do. It's not in whether they come back or not. The answer is always within you, in how you choose to interpret the experience, in what you learn from it, in what it allows you to discover about yourself. It's not about understanding why the other person left, but about understanding what changes in you because of their absence. Because when you learn to let go without resentment, when you stop clinging to what is not meant to be, when you trust that everything happens for a reason, then love stops being suffering and becomes growth. If he truly loves you, he will find his way back. But if he doesn't, it doesn't mean you are unworthy of love. It means his role in your life has been fulfilled. His purpose wasn't to stay, but to teach you something. And once you understand the lesson, once you stop seeking answers outside of you and begin to look for them within, you will discover that the person you truly needed to find was always there, yourself. When someone you love walks away without a clear explanation, the first thing we feel is emptiness, an uncertainty that forces us to search for answers. But the mind tends to look for solutions on the surface, in the obvious, without pausing to consider that something much deeper is moving within. That person's unconscious. Jung said that everything we do in life is influenced by what we do not know about ourselves, by invisible forces that act from the shadow. So when someone ignores you, when they seem to disappear without any apparent reason, what is happening is not just a conscious decision, but the manifestation of an internal conflict awakened by the relationship. Authentic love is not just emotion, it is also confrontation. It forces us to see ourselves reflected in the other, to face the parts of our psyche that we've repressed or denied. And not everyone is ready for that. There are people who've spent their whole lives avoiding looking inward, distracting themselves with external things, control, independence, the belief that they will never need anyone. But love breaks down all these barriers. You cannot love without exposing yourself, without allowing the other to see even what we ourselves try to hide. And when someone who is not ready to be seen in this way finds themselves in a relationship that reveals parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge, the most common reaction is to pull away, not because they don't love, but because they don't know how to deal with what love is bringing to the surface. Jung explained that people don't truly relate to others, but to the projections they've created in their minds. When you fall in love with someone, what you actually love is the image you've built of that person, the representation of your desires, your expectations, your emotional needs. But as time goes on and the relationship deepens, that idealized image begins to crumble and reality appears. You see the person as they are, with their fears, their wounds, their contradictions, and that can be terrifying. Many people are afraid of being loved in their entirety because it means accepting that they are imperfect, that they have needs, that they can no longer pretend to be self-sufficient. And it's at this point that some choose the easier path, to ignore, to walk away, to disappear. When someone who loves you pulls away, the most painful part is not the absence itself, but the uncertainty, the not knowing what it really meant, not understanding why someone who once felt so present suddenly stopped being there. And that lack of answers can become an obsession, an endless cycle of unanswered questions. But Jung taught us that the human mind is not designed to find all the answers outside. It must look inward. It's not about understanding why the other left, but about understanding which part of you was affected by their absence. Because when you can identify that part, you stop searching outside for what can only be resolved within. Love is a process of self-discovery, a mirror in which we see ourselves, reflected with all our light and all our shadows. And what hurts the most when someone ignores us is not the distance itself, but what that distance reveals about ourselves. Jung said the unconscious speaks to us through the experiences we live, and that every situation that creates emotional conflict is an opportunity to learn something about our own psyche. So instead of asking why that person left, ask yourself what their absence is showing you about yourself. Why does it hurt so much? Why do you need their presence to feel complete? What part of you placed your worth in their attention? The ego seeks external answers because it doesn't want to face the real root of the issue. It wants to believe that if the other person comes back, everything will be fine, that if we get a logical explanation, we'll be able to move on. But the truth is, the problem is never the other person. It's what they're leaving stirred inside us. Healing doesn't happen when the other returns. It happens when we understand why their absence affected us the way it did. And when we understand that, when we stop seeking outside and begin to look within, something changes. The wound stops being a burden and becomes a teacher. It's no longer a punishment, but an opportunity to grow, to learn, to discover who we truly are without needing anyone else to feel whole. Many times, the greatest act of love is not fighting for someone's presence, but allowing their absence to transform us. Because love is not possession, not a test of endurance, not a battle to see who gives in first. True love needs no strategies, no games, no constant displays of interest. It's a meeting of two souls who are ready to see and accept each other as they are. If someone pulls away, if someone chooses to ignore you, maybe it's not because they don't love you, but because they don't yet love themselves enough to sustain the love they feel for you. And in that case, the only thing you can do is let go. not as an act of resignation, but as an act of trust that everything happens for a reason, even absence. Real love is not a chase. It's not a constant need to prove our worth. You don't need to convince anyone to love you or find ways to make them come back. Because when love is true, it always finds its way back, not because you forced it, but because both people are ready to sustain it. And if they don't return, then the lesson their absence taught. You will be far more valuable than their presence, because you'll have learned that love should never depend on someone else's uncertainty, but on the certainty you carry within yourself. Love is not about waiting for someone to choose you. It's about learning to choose yourself. And if someone ignores you, if someone leaves you in uncertainty, then maybe what life is trying to tell you is that you don't need to be there, that you deserve something clearer, deeper, more authentic, that true love is not found in absence, but in the presence of someone who chooses to stay without you having to ask. If this message resonated with you, if at any point you felt these words describe what you're going through, I invite you to leave a comment below. Tell me your story. What part of this message touched something in you? Because when we share our stories, when we create space for others to speak too, we build a community where knowledge and reflection can reach many more people. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. This is only the beginning of a journey of self-discovery through love and consciousness. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because you never know when a word can shift someone's perspective and help them see things from a deeper place. Remember, love is not about waiting for someone to choose you. It's about learning to choose yourself first. And when you do, when you truly do, everything in your life will begin to change. See you in the next video.